So Shana Tova, everyone. It was the afternoon of Yom Kippur. I think it was 1964, when I came home from school a little bit early, and there in our living room sat my grandfather, Nathan Ortenberg. It was not unusual these days to see him there. He lived around the corner, and since the passing of our grandmother Sheva, he had been spending more time at our house. He was lonely, for he loved her dearly. But he took comfort in spending more time with our family, in particular, my brother Ron and me. As I dropped my school bag in the hallway, I noticed Zaidie with tears rolling down his cheeks. And in the background, I heard the crackling of a record on our old phonograph. It was the voice of one of his favorite cantors, Cantor Pierre Pinchik, and he was reciting the Kol Nidre. I had never seen Zaidie cry, even after the death of our grandmother, and certainly I had never seen him being moved by anything religious. But in many ways, he was the most religious person that I had ever met. He didn't have much use for organized religion. He wasn't fond of ritual, or for that matter, the rote way that he saw Judaism being practiced. But his religion was to find the cracks in the world and work to make things better. Just after World War II, he and a group of what were known in those days as secular Jews gathered at the Montreal Jewish Agency to adopt foster children who had been orphaned during the Holocaust. And their request was simple. Find us children from the bottom of the pile, those children who have the least chance of being adopted. Those are the children that we want to sponsor. For religion, he would say, is in his deeds. But on that afternoon, at that moment, I felt no joy. I asked my grandfather, Zaidie, why are you crying? He said, Zine, grandson, feel the soul of the cantor as he sings. Listen to how it comes from his heart. As hard as we try, we can never be perfect. And there are so many chances that we miss every single day and every single year to help others. That's what I hear in his voice. And the two of us sat there together with this old 78 record crackling round and round. And I've never forgotten that moment. And I remember it every Yom Kippur. Each one of us here has someone who has inspired us. Our parents, our grandparents, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher, a mentor. Who was it that inspired you the most? When I think of it, while I've been inspired by many official and unofficial teachers, when I think about what kind of rabbi, what kind of person that I would like to be, much of what I've learned comes from my grandfather Nissen. Lessons like the ones that you learned from your parents or grandparents, which are so important to share on this, the final day of our 10-day journey. To be better, to turn over a new leaf, to let go of useless things, to find something that we've done well this year and make it better. I've told this story here a number of times, but one day, Zaidie, Nissen, and I were walking on the streets of Montreal, where I was raised, and he had taken me to see a movie. I was 10 years old. As we exited the theater, a man staggered up to my grandfather and asked, "Hey, buddy, can you help me out? I want something to eat." And my grandfather reached into his pocket, and he gave him a $2 bill. I said, "Zaidie, I think that guy's going to go buy beer." "Zin," he said, "grandson, 5 people come to me and only one needs it. How can I live with myself knowing that I have denied that one person who truly needs it? Better to waste a few dollars than to turn away someone in need. Most importantly, it gives everyone hope." What I learned from Zaidie on that day was that you shall never be so cynical that you close your hearts to those in need. Better to take a chance and lose than to lose faith in all humanity. My grandfather came to Canada in 1907 from a small shtetl near Kiev. He began as a peddler going door to door in far northern Quebec, selling combs and socks and cosmetics and toiletries, with a large pekele strapped to his back. He settled in Quebec City and then moved to a little pulp and paper town about 25 miles away named Donnacona, perhaps 3,000 souls. There he was known as Le Juif, the Jew. He became a popular member of the local business community, often holding court with fellow merchants in his menswear store. One day he received a call from the owner of the local Chinese restaurant. Tom wasn't feeling well. My grandfather immediately closed his store, went to him, wrapped Tom in a blanket in the back seat of his car, and drove him along the bumpy two-lane highway to the hospital in Quebec City. As the doctors were assessing Tom, my grandfather proceeded then to the Chinese quarter of Quebec City. He walked into a Chinese restaurant and in his broken Yiddish-tainted French said to a room full of strangers, "One of your kinsmen is in the hospital, and I think it would boost his morale if you would visit him." A few minutes later, my grandfather and 5 of Tom's landsmen piled into his car and were on their way to the hospital. My grandfather taught me that it is not enough just to perform a mitzvah. What can we do to exceed the mitzvah? Not just to check the box, but to do it right. Tom did not survive his illness. He left his entire estate, restaurant, chairs, tables, fryers, plates, knives, forks, napkins, to my grandfather. Zaidie sold these items in 1937 for $400 and donated the money to the Chinese Mission Hospital in Montreal. He taught me that no one should ever benefit from the hardship of another. One day, outside of his men's store in Donnacona, he noticed a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, hitchhiking on the main street. He asked who she was and what she was doing. It seems her father had remarried and his new wife did not treat her new stepdaughter with kindness. So she left home penniless, with her thumb out, to live with her brother in Montreal, 150 miles away. Zaidie took her to the local boarding house, fed her, bought her the bottle of nail polish which she asked for, and bought her a train ticket to Montreal. The next morning he took her to the station, and as she boarded the train, she said, "I don't even know your name." He replied, "Never mind, have a good trip, the best of luck to you." About a month later, the Donnacona post office received a letter addressed to Monsieur le Juif, Donnacona. Mr. Jew, Donnacona. It got to him. It was a letter of thanks from the young girl who said that she had been in a state of despair and depression until my grandfather came along. She was now settled in Montreal and was doing well. He taught me never to be afraid to ask, "How can I help?" And that a mitzvah is not in the reward, it's in the good that it does. One day, Mr. Cote, the owner of the hardware store next door, came by, and he told my grandfather, "I have some disconcerting news for you, sir." "What?" asked my grandfather. "At every religious service, the priest of the town church makes an announcement. N'achetez pas de juif. Don't buy from the Jew." Naturally, Zaidie was very upset at this and called the priest and asked for a meeting. "Je suis pas intéressé." "I'm not interested," said the priest. And this happened numerous times that week. That Sunday, Zaidie went to the church and sat in the front row of the service in the Catholic Church. The priest did not make his usual comment. The next day, the priest came to the Zaidie store. He knew little about Judaism, but my grandfather, who was knowledgeable in Talmud and Torah, began a dialogue with him. Needless to say, the priest never uttered anti-Semitic words again, and the two became friends. What I learned from my grandfather is when someone hates you, come closer, because people are good at their core. And perhaps more discussion and interaction can combat hatred and even anti-Semitism. And it was not all business for my grandfather. He became the general manager of the local hockey team. Often in later years on Saturday nights when he would come over to watch hockey, he would yell at the screen, "Stop passing, shoot, shoot. You can't score if you don't shoot." Years later, Wayne Gretzky stole that line, or I'd like to think so, when he said, "You don't score on 100% of the shots you don't take." My grandfather taught me to never be afraid to take a shot. One day, long after he moved to Montreal, my mother called Zaidie for a favor. Ron, my brother, needed glue for a school project. My father was out of town. Could he pick up some glue? On that evening, Zaidie came across the threshold with not just one kind of glue, but 4 different kinds of glue. My brother put those 4 glues in a small cupboard next to his bed, and I'm not even sure if he ever used them. But he kept them nearby for decades to remember Zaidie long after he was gone. The other day, my brother reflected. It taught me that when you do somebody a favor, that you go above and beyond. He also taught us about love. Every evening as he came to our home to visit after dinner, my brother and I would run up to him and tell him about our day. "I got an A in algebra," I remember my brother Ron saying. Zaidie nodded his head and went, "Pshh." I don't think Zaidie had any idea what algebra was, but I think we learned from him. And what I remember in particular on this Yom Kippur, prior to Yizkor, that the definition of unconditional love is being excited when someone in your life is excited, and being pained when someone in your life feels pain. That is love. He wasn't perfect. On February 9th, 1964, he came to our house as he did every Sunday night as we sat together to watch the Ed Sullivan Show. That's what he called it. That night was the night the Beatles made their first appearance. "Pshh," he said as he watched, "they'll never last more than a month." On Passover, when it was his turn to read, he stood up and read the words in a way that actually taught us about freedom. He taught us that words mean something, and that religion is something to be cherished and explored, not ritualized and endured. And there are many, many, many more stories, and I know that all of you have them from your parents and grandparents. But on these days of reflection, just prior to Yizkor, I wonder what those who've passed away may be feeling as they embrace us from the world of souls. Are we being the sons and daughters, the grandchildren that they taught us to be? On the eve of his 80th birthday, his friends gathered in Montreal to celebrate years of memories of charity and giving. And that evening, he died. His funeral was held the next day, attended by those who had come to celebrate him. Now they came to honor him. Jews, Christians, observant, non-observant, philanthropists, atheists, intellectuals, those with whom and my grandmother he had launched the Jewish Public Library. They celebrated a person who had made a difference in the world. As I said, most of you have someone in your life whom Zaidie may remind you of. Who are they? What did they teach you? And if they were here right now, is there any advice they would give you during these challenging times? On this day, when we consider whether we want to be the same or go from here to there, how would they advise us to make ourselves better? On this Day of Atonement, I remember my grandfather sitting in front of the phonograph crying, as good as he was, asking God with tears, "What did I miss this past year, and how can I be better?" Those who have passed to the world of souls remain alive in us. They continue to lift and inspire us during these challenging times. Hopefully, our children will remember us in the same way, for our values and our stories, and the way that we lived our lives, not the stuff that we acquired. And I keep thinking as we approach the Yizkor prayer, our prayer of remembrance, I wonder if Zaidie were standing next to me, what are the 3 things that I would share with him? "Zaidie, we had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. We held services on Zoom. People felt close." And he would say, "Zoom. Pshh." And by the way, Zaidie, you have a great-grandson, Sean, who carries your name, and a great-great-grandson named Mason. And we've tried to raise all our children right, to be good human beings, to practice religion through our deeds. Oh, and one more thing, Zaidie. I think you were wrong. People are still listening to the Beatles. And he would say, "Pshh." Let us all remember those in our past who by their hard work and sacrifices serve to this day as examples to us of how to be better people. Or maybe we can be the person to start that change, to be higher and better these days than the world around us. I'm a rabbi, but I'm also a father, a husband, and a grandfather. But I am still and forever, like you, someone's child and someone's grandchild. It is a chain of life which has carried our family and our people, the dor vador, from generation to generation. For there is nothing as important in our lives than our good name. Who are those people upon whose shoulders that you stand? May their names always be for a blessing. On this Yom Kippur, they inspire us to choose life, not so much through our talk, but how we act. Through those things, and in the year to come, what are those things that we need to let go of? Instead, let us choose new things which they would tell us really matter, to uplift ourselves, to take this world and ourselves and make it better. Shana Tova, everyone. Gamar Chatima Tova.